Hey Islanders, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. Picture a lecture hall in Seoul, packed with people. A man is holding the microphone. His voice is low and calm. He speaks slowly, but he never sounds unsure. He tells the room that the United Nations is finished. He says the world needs a second UN, a new global body built for what he calls a planetary administration. And he says we should design it together. The young people in the audience lean forward. They listen closely. He tells them Korea is not just a small peninsula squeezed between four big powers. And he says we are standing right at the center of a new world taking shape. His book came out last month. Of course, it went to #1 on the bestseller list. He had been on one of the biggest political talk shows on Korean YouTube. He had also been on a popular book channel run by a foundation named after a former president. The host was one of Korea's best-known liberal commentators. He introduced himself as a historian, also a scholar of a coming new age, also an earth scholar, also a futurist. His name is Lee Byung-han. When times feel uncertain, a confident voice draws a crowd. That part is very human. The problem is what comes next. One young man in the lecture hall was moved by what he heard. A few years later, he was signing papers for a personal loan. He's 28. The reporting calls him Mr. Jung. He first met Lee Byung-han in 2020 at a book talk. Some years after that, Lee Byung-han brought him a business offer, a media project. Lee said 20 billion won of investment was on its way. He told Jung he would make him the CEO. The money never came. Soon, the company could not even pay its staff. Then, Lee asked for something else. He asked Jung to cover his overdue credit card bills and his living cost. That was the start of it. Lee promised he would pay it all back within a week. Jung believed him. He took out a personal loan and handed over 20 million won, about $14,000. But whenever things got hard, Lee stopped answering. More than a year went by like that. Only last year, Lee said he had finally found the real money. He even showed a signed investment letter. A short while later, that investor was convicted of fraud and taken into custody in the courtroom. Jung asked him what he planned to do now. How could he get back his money? And the face that had been redesigning the world went cold. According to the report, he said, "Why is this my responsibility?" Jung is now carrying more than 70 million won in debt. That is close to $50,000. Jung was not the only one. 6 years later, Lee invited another young person in their 20s into a climate crisis project. Their name was never made public. They started a company together with other young people. They were told funding from the UN was coming. They worked 3 months without pay. That summer, Lee went quiet for a month. The company shut down. The young people waited a year. Then they reported it to the labor office. It took several more months before the unpaid wages finally came through. Both of them described the same pattern. Lee kept dropping names. He said he spoke with a presidential candidate every day. He said a powerful lawmaker came to him for advice. He said the chairman of Amori Pacific had offered him $1 billion a year. He said the chairman of Mirai Asset was a lot of fun to talk to. That is one of the Korea's biggest financial groups. Not one of these names was something a young person could check. And look at where he actually was during all of this. Around the time he was borrowing living expenses from Jung, he said something else. He liked to spend a month or two of every break-in, whatever city interested him. When reporters tried to reach him, he said he had been in New York for a month. He was asking young people to cover his overdue bills. Meanwhile, he was moving from city to city, season by season. Here's the part that is hardest to sit with. A man who sold young people a future was paying for his own present with their money. This is how Lee described his own path. In his 20s, a social science student. In his 30s, a historian. Then, after a long journey across Eurasia in his 40s, a scholar of a coming new age, an earth scholar, a futurist. I keep looking at the direction of that move. The word historian carries weight. There are sources. There is peer review. You can put a text next to the original and check it line by line. And he did get caught by that kind of check. His writing about a 17th country Korean crown prince was found to follow another researcher's paper very closely. He even copied the mistake from the original. And there's more. He also kept calling himself a professor at GIST, the Gwangju Institute of Science and Technology. He said it out loud at book talks. He said, quote, "My name is Lee Byung-han. I hold a special professorship at the Science Institution in Gwangju, and I used to be a historian," end quote. Then the school put out a statement. They said he had never been faculty there in any form and had no contract with them at all. He had only sat on a planning committee for one forum the school hosted. They also said they found out about the first title back in 2025 and asked him to stop using it. He kept using it anyway. So in May of this year, they sent him a formal legal notice. The title that made people trust him was not rare either. A futurist is a different thing. That title cannot be proven wrong. He's talking about things that have not happened yet. So nothing he says can be tested today. And if it never happens, he can always say the timing is not right yet. That switch was also a switch of audience. A historian speaks to other scholars, people who can catch a copied line or a wrong date. A futurist speaks to anxious individuals, especially people in their 20s, the ones shaken hardest by AI, by the job market, by the state of the world. He moved toward people who had no way to check him, but who badly needed comfort and certainty. From a room where he is judged to a room where he is not. This shape is familiar and not only in Korea. Think of Anna Delvey in New York, posing as a German heiress, or Elizabeth Holmes in Silicon Valley selling a machine that never worked. We have our own versions. Jeon Cheong-jo pretend to be a chaebol heir and a prosecutor. There are also so many people who sold a self-made success story. When people started checking, the businesses and the numbers behind the story kept changing. These people were selling different things, but structure was same. First, display an asset nobody can verify. Then use the trust that display creates. Then take real resources from the person who trusted you. And when trouble arrives, all people disappeared or changed their story. There's one more name in this family tree with a slightly different flavor. Kim Nan-do, who wrote a huge bestseller in 2010. The Korean title means something like, "It hurts, and that is what youth is." The criticism of him was not fraud. It was hypocrisy. He was born into a comfortable family. He studied abroad. He walked the smooth road to a professorship at Seoul National University. People asked how someone who never hit a wall could lecture young people about pain. They also said the book pretended to comfort while turning a structural problem into a question of personal attitude. Lee Byung-han took one more step from there. He crossed from hypocrisy into real financial harm into criminal territory. High-control religious groups in South Korea work the same way. An authority nobody can verify. Emotional attachment to that authority. And then the attachment turned into cash. One counseling psychologist explained the pattern. Con artists who borrow large sums and then vanish usually start small. They borrow a little and pay back right away, again and again. That builds trust. Once they can borrow bigger amounts, they take one very large sum and disappear. Mr. Jung took out a personal loan on the strength of a single promise. Then he held on for over a year through avoidance and silence. And through all of it, not many people said no to this man. I was inside the same circuit myself. I used to work at an indie magazine. Then I moved to a commercial fashion magazine. The first thing I learned there was not how to ask a real question about the times we live in. It was how to put the hottest, most talked about name on the page. The magazine had to sell. Advertisers had to be happy. Only then would there be a next issue. In the middle of all that, artists with something weird to say were getting hurt. Nobody was asking them a proper question. I pushed back against that habit for years, but I also knew the truth. In a market like ours, a magazine with no money simply shuts down. I was going to lose the job. So I went back and forth between buzz and sincerity, and I felt terrible about it. If you wanted to interview whoever was hot that season, you waited in a line for a month. All the leverage had already moved to them. Some days I could not tell if I was a journalist or a publicist. Looking back, the logic of that line was simple. If a name was already proven by attention, there was no risk in putting them on the page. Attention did the job that checking should have done. That's exactly the gap Lee Byung-han walked into. You get a #1 bestseller, you showed up again and again on the big YouTube shows, and nobody stops to ask whether what you are saying is true. The psychologist Solomon Asch showed something uncomfortable about this. He used the lines drawn on a card where the correct answer is obvious to anyone. Then he put people in a group that said the wrong answer out loud, and most of them went along with it. He found one more thing. When the answer is unclear, the pressure to conform gets much stronger. Buzz fills in exactly that unclear space. It hands you the group's confidence ready-made. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it the need for cognitive closure. It is the pull to reach a final answer quickly because sitting with an open question feels bad. And the less clear the future looks, the stronger that pull gets. What Lee Byung-han sold was exactly that. A conclusion reached too early. Every society has this tendency, but the conditions that switch it on are different from place to place. The psychologist Geert Hofstede built a model for comparing cultures. One of his measures is called uncertainty avoidance. Korea scores 85 on it. That puts us among the highest in the world. Korea also scores fairly high on power distance. So we tend to accept rank and authority as natural. Put those two together. Uncertainty feels bad, so someone selling certainty is attractive. And we are sensitive to authority. So when that certainty comes wrapped in a doctorate and political friendships, it goes down easily. There is an old theory that explains why this impatience turns into hero worship so fast. The political scientist Gregory Henderson wrote a book in 1968 called Korea, the Politics of the Vortex. His diagnosis was that Korea had almost no strong groups in the middle of society. So the actions of individuals shaped the structure of modern Korea. Think about labor unions, neighborhood communities, religious associations. Groups that sit between the individual and the state and absorb some of the shock. When those are weak, a person with nowhere to share their anxiety has to take it somewhere. They lean on a strong individual who will interpret that anxiety for them. In Korea, a newer hierarchy filled that gap. We call it hakbeol. It means the ranking of the school you came from. Lee Byung-han's doctorate and his historian title borrowed the language of that ranking, and it bought his trust. I want to be clear about something. There's a common belief about this country that we are the worst in the world for fraud and for coercive religious group. That is not what the numbers say. Compare reported fraud cases per person across countries, and Korea in 2020 came in lower than Sweden, Germany, Denmark, and Finland. And very few countries even had a legal definition for these religious groups or a way to police them. Only a handful do, mostly in Europe. Japan is an interesting case. It first stripped a religious group of its legal status after the Om Shinrikyo subway attack in 1995. It reached for that power again after Shinzo Abe was shot and killed. And this June, Japan's Supreme Court made that order final for the group once known as the Unification Church, 통일교. Korea is different. Our legal standard for shutting down a religious group is far stricter. So even when serious problems come out, real consequences rarely follow. It's not that we respect religious freedom more, the bar for acting is simply set very high. So here is the accurate version. Korea is not the country that produces the most con artists or the most self-appointed prophets. Korea is a country with unusual good conditions for one of them to grow. School pedigree stands in for checking. YouTube makes that trust louder. And a culture that struggles with open questions feeds the whole thing. This is not a question of how many. It is a question of how large one person can grow. So where does this habit of trusting rank come from? I keep looking back at our history. South Korean government was founded in 1948. Our first president was Syng-man. Less than 12 years in, he had already forced the constitution open and rewritten it twice. Then citizens rose up and brought him down. Next came Park Chung-hee. He took power in a military coup in 1961. Later, he rewrote the rules again so he could stay for life. Then came Doo-hwan. He seized the control of the army in a mutiny in December 1979. There's a line in the film 12/12 The Day, known here by its Korean title Seoul Spring. The coup leader says something like this to his ally. He says, human beings are animals who want someone strong to lead them. What makes that line frightening is that it does not stop within the man who staged the coup. Lee Byung-han, Jeon Cheong-jo, so many people, and the leaders of high-control religious groups, they are all still acting it out. The role is the same. It is just that futurist has taken the place of a president. An individual has taken the place of a state. At the same time, this history is not only a history of obedience. It carries a tradition of resistance too. Koreans have brought down rigged elections and military governments more than once. Those young people who reported Lee Byung-han to the labor office who took their story to the press. The fact that this report exists at all, that is proof the instinct to push back is still alive. The place where disobedience gets trained is the classroom. In our exam system, even a question with no valid answer is rarely admitted to be an error. So we train the reflect for finding the official answer. We never built the muscle for making an answer ourselves. In 1994, Seo released a song called The Classroom Idea. He was the musician who rewrote Korean pop in the 90s. The song went after the way school pushes every student toward one correct answer. That was more than 30 years ago. And that same year, one student got a perfect score on the Suneung, our national college entrance exam. He came to the same conclusion later. He said chasing only the official answers had not been a good way to learn. Someone who stood at the very top of that system said that decades on. It tells you how little the structure has changed. If you're never trained to argue and discuss, you rarely make a judgment yourself. You rarely live with the result of your own judgment. So as an adult, you keep looking for a voice that will sound sure for you. And handing over your judgment has a quiet benefit. If it goes wrong, you can hand over the blame with it. We have a word in Korean called nunchi. It means reading the mood in the room before you speak. Counseling psychologists here have been built a scale to measure it. Put a Korean in a classroom or a meeting overseas. Ask who wants to speak first. We usually do not raise our hands. We watch where other people are leaning and then we decide what we think. It works the same way when something big happens in the news. As Asch showed, the less clear the answer, the stronger the pressure to conform. Faced with a question that has no set answer, we read the room before we decide. That same impatience showed up in our movie theaters. Na Hong-jin, the director of The Wailing, made a film called Hope. It asked one question. What do we do when we miss something we cannot understand? It's a film about a world with no correct answer and about chance with no mercy. I've made a whole video about it on this channel if you want the longer version. But instead of sitting with that uncertainty, audiences here rush to pick sides. When Korea's best-known film critic gave the film a high score, people went after him online for days. They accused him of favoring the director out of friendship or money, and that made the discomfort go away fast. The philosopher Han Byung-Chul has written about how a society stops tolerating what feels foreign to it. You could see exactly that in this whole episode. That classroom could not sit with a question that had no answer, and the theater could not sit with a film that had no answer. That same circuit repeats inside the Korean media. This habit of handling over judgment shows up most openly with the political commentary channels on YouTube. In Korea, these commentators held remarkable power. One explanation is simple. Thinking for yourself, deciding for yourself, carrying the weight of it. That is frightening. If you follow someone else's thinking and it fails, you can put the failure on them. The same faces get called back from one channel to the next. It works like a paying off one credit card with another. I don't think that's only about fandom. I think it is also about writers and producers being lazy and avoiding risk. If a guest already delivered views and buzz on one show, the next show does not have to gamble. They just book the same person. So a guest from one political talk show turns up on the Big Book channel. Then on other culture and humanities channels with the same audience. That's how the chain gets built. And Korea is small. Because it is small, it is unusually easy to turn one person into a hero quickly. A handful of channels keep cycling the same few faces, and the repetition itself starts to look like proof. Lee Byung-han rode that loop. He appeared on a big channel after another and built public trust along the way. Handing over your judgment and going along with the majority are not exactly the same thing, but they meet at one point. In both, you do not say no. There was one moment when this country tried to push against that. In 2001, a securities firm ran an ad. The line was, be the person who can say no when everyone else say yes. It was a huge hit. And I think that popularity proves the point. Saying no was rare enough to sell as a slogan. Within a few years, people were nothing that we had all gone back to saying yes. Reading the room, an education built around correct answers, respect for rank. All of it was woven together by the exam system, by office culture, by the whole media world. A net like that does not tear because of one commercial. The audience in that lecture hall was inside the same net. Those young people leaning forward, ready to design a new world, buddied together. People who went there for a little comfort and for hope. I can't blame anyone who was sitting in that room. In a country where the name of your school turns into trust with nobody checking, where YouTube amplifies that trust, where all of us are trained to read the room before we speak. How many of us could have stayed out of that room? And if another confident face shows up next time, I'm not sure they will be able to say no in that moment. But there is one thing I want to say to them. Please do not mistake the certainty Lee Byung-han was selling for hope. Certainty about the future is not hope. It's closer to the opposite of hope. Hope is the strength to keep walking without knowing. Certainty is a different thing. If you earn that certainty yourself by living through something and judging it, that is real strength. But that is not what he was selling. He was selling the kind of certainty you lean on because you cannot bear not knowing. An answer somebody else decided for you. An uncertain tomorrow does not mean an unhappy one. At 20, I worried about turning 30. At 30, I worried about turning 40. Looking back, I have one regret. I should have lived those moments as hard as I worried about the next ones. I left Korea in my 30s, flying toward a world I did not know. On that plane, the sharp fear passed. What came after, it was butterflies in my stomach. Excitement. Freedom. I had never felt so free as when I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Worrying was not a way of preparing for the future. It was a way of mortgaging the present. Almost everything we are anxious about has not happened yet. So if there are people in their 20s watching this, here's all I want to say. If 30 scares you, if 40 scares you, don't give today away to that fear. Instead of trusting someone who sells certainty, try trusting yourself, living today. So, what did you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it together. If this video spoke to you, please support it with a like and a subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join as a member. This has been Hana's Island. You're safe here now. Until next time, stay well on your own island, at your own latitude.